Hey guys, tonight we begin with the remarkable tale of someone you definitely wouldn't want to trade places with. You're not a knight, a noble, or even a well liked shepherd. No, tonight you are a sin eater, a walking, breathing, slightly mildewed moral sponge living in 18th century Wales. Your job? To chow down on a hunk of stale bread placed on a dead man's chest and absorb every terrible thing he did. You're the last stop before the afterlife, and absolutely no one wants to sit next to you at dinner. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing ankle deep in mud at the edge of a sheep pasture. The wind is doing its best impression of a knife across your face. In one hand, you're holding a square of barley bread. In the other, a tin cup of watery ale that smells like someone whispered hops near it once and got bored. Before you lies a body, recently expired, suspiciously bloated, and on its chest, a damp cloth where the bread is to be laid. You sigh. This again. It's not glamorous work, but it's work, technically. You kneel down. The onlookers take a collective step backward, like you might explode or start speaking Latin. You mutter a prayer, something half remembered, part Latin, part Old Welsh, and part something your gran used to say when the firewood ran out. Then you press the bread onto the dead man's chest, let it rest, and begin your sacred snack. Cold, chewy, vaguely porky. You hope that's just the bread. A dog barks in the distance. A child cries. Someone coughs, loudly, like they want to remind everyone that they are not you. This is your life now. You used to think sin eating was symbolic, some deep metaphor. Now it's more like competitive swallowing while pretending the deceased didn't die of something contagious. Historians still argue whether sin eaters were official figures, folk priests in disguise, or just desperate men in need of coin and completely out of options. The records are vague, patchy, and unsurprisingly, a bit smudged with gravy stains. But what they do agree on is this: sin eaters were part outcast, part necessity. A social contradiction wrapped in a damp wool cloak. No one wants to talk to you, but no one wants to die without you either. You chew with your head bowed, the cold biting at your ears, the smell of earth and decay lingering in the air. You're not just eating crusty barley and the occasional raisin, you're absorbing sins, all of them, big ones, small ones, theft, anger, lust, unpaid debts, and whatever old Thomas did behind the alehouse with the blacksmith's wife. You taste guilt. You chew through shame. And the worst part? You do it for a coin and a crust. Maybe a sip of something stronger if the family feels generous. But don't count on it. When the deed is done, you stand. Your knees crack like a dying branch. The mourners murmur something polite, but don't meet your eyes. A child tries to hand you a flower. Her mother pulls her back, like you might steal her soul through eye contact. You walk away without a word. Funerals don't come with applause, and it's not like you have somewhere warm to go. Your cottage, or what passes for it, is a collapsing lean-to nestled behind the abandoned chapel. It leaks. It creaks. It harbors more spiders than furniture, but it's yours. Probably. No one has tried to take it from you yet, which in sin eater terms is as good as a deed. You trudge home, the bread still sitting heavily in your belly. Not metaphorically, literally. It was dense. like eating a brick wrapped in regret. You pass a group of boys who pretend not to see you. One crosses himself, another spits. You get it. You're not exactly the village hero. But here's the twist: they'll all call for you one day. When the priest isn't available, when the conscience is heavy, when the dead man's last words were, "Please don't tell my wife," that's when you shine, or rather absorb. The funny thing? No one teaches you how to be a sin eater. There's no apprenticeship, no diploma. You learn by doing, or, more often, by being too broke to say no. You picked up the rituals from a man named Bryn, who died mid bite at a funeral, which, if we're honest, probably didn't help the soul he was trying to save, and so it began, one sin soaked snack at a time. As you settle into your cot, a slab of straw that smells like smoked cheese and mildew, you close your eyes. You dream not of angels or redemption. You dream of warm food, dry socks, and a time before you were the human equivalent of a spiritual vacuum cleaner. But tomorrow brings another call, another funeral, another heavy loaf. You thought you were saving souls. Mostly, you're saving yourself from starvation. You wake up to the familiar feeling of a damp blanket fused to your shoulder and the delightful scent of old hay mixed with goat breath. The goat is not a metaphor. She's standing over you, chewing something that used to be your pillow. You groan and sit up, spine popping like someone's cracking walnuts in slow motion. Welcome to another fine morning as the village sin eater, unloved, unwashed, and, as of last night, the proud new owner of old Ianto's mortal failings. You don't even remember what you muttered over his chest, but it stuck with you. That peculiar mix of stale barley and existential dread. The fire in your little hearth is long dead. So is the mouse that tried to nest in your boot. You nudge it aside without ceremony. Priorities. Outside, it's drizzling in that smug, sideways Welsh way that feels like the sky is flicking wet fingers at your face for sport. You pull on your cloak, which smells less like aged wool and more like wet dog in distress, and step into the mud. Your breakfast options are bleak. You chew a cold turnip with the enthusiasm of someone eating a sock. There's also some ale left from yesterday's funeral, but it's developed a personality overnight. You sip it anyway, then come the pebbles. Ping, ping. The children of the village have invented a new game. It's called Hit the Sin Sponge. You are the sponge. They're not cruel, really, just superstitious. Their parents tell them not to come near you, so they test your humanity by throwing rocks at your windows and running away screaming. Sort of a reverse trick or treat, but with more judgment. You step out and glare. One child falls over in the mud and yells, "He looked at me. I'm cursed." You sigh. Honestly, you've had worse reviews. You head toward the village, your boots squelching with every step. Your goal: bread, maybe cheese, preferably not moldy. You don't hold out much hope. The market vendors don't love seeing you. You have the opposite effect of a warm smile or a catchy jingle. You're like a walking reminder that death is both inevitable and slightly unhygienic. At the first stall, the fishmonger pretends not to see you. He stacks haddock with suspicious speed. "Sold out," he mutters without turning around. The stall is overflowing. The baker's wife gives you a nod that might be respect or indigestion. She slides you a loaf of yesterday's bread. Dense, cracked, barely edible, but edible nonetheless. You reach into your pouch and pull out 2 coins that once sat on a dead man's tongue. She flinches slightly but takes them anyway, using a handkerchief, like you're radioactive. You leave without speaking. It's easier that way. Down the lane, the blacksmith glances at you, then back at his work. He doesn't fear you. Not really. He's too tired. His wife died last spring, and he never called for a sin eater. Said he'd rather risk purgatory than see her touched by a man like you. Fair. But you still remember that funeral. How quiet it was. How the bread was never placed. Historians still argue whether people believed you truly took on the dead's sins or if it was all symbolic, ritual, superstition, a leftover from pagan traditions dressed up in Christian language. But it didn't matter to the villagers. To them, once you ate, you weren't just absorbing guilt, you were marked by it. Every death added a layer to your soul like soot on stone. No amount of scrubbing or praying could peel it off. You pass the chapel. The priest is sweeping the front steps with excessive devotion, like he's hoping to purify the dirt itself. He doesn't greet you. You don't expect him to. Once, years ago, you tried to attend a service. Just sat in the back, quiet. Half the congregation got up and left. The other half watched you, like you might turn into a goat mid-hymn. You're not banned exactly. You're just too much for holy ground. You sit on a mossy bench near the well and break the bread with your fingers. It's hard enough to defend itself, but you manage. As you chew, a group of passing women veer sharply around you like you're emitting invisible gas. One crosses herself. Another spits. It's fine. You weren't eating for company anyway. You finish your meal and lean back, watching the clouds roll over the hills like bored sheep. Somewhere in the valley, a bell tolls, low, somber, and full of bad news. Another funeral. You wonder who it is this time. The shepherd with the missing toes, the old woman who talked to her ducks, someone new, someone kind, someone mean. It doesn't matter. They'll call for you eventually, and when they do, you'll kneel again, bread in hand, mouth dry, prayers in pieces. You've stopped hoping to be understood. Now, you just hope they bake something fresh. You make your way toward the village square, but you don't exactly blend in. You walk through the crowd like a shadow wrapped in damp wool. No one touches you. No one speaks. They part around you like fog splitting over a hill, avoiding your eyes, holding their breath, as if sin might be contagious through shared oxygen. A young woman sells apples nearby. When you approach, she quietly covers the fruit with a cloth and busies herself rearranging carrots. Not even subtle. No matter how long you've been at this, it still stings a little. It's not just avoidance, it's the complete social erasure that wears you down. People don't just ignore you, they act like you don't exist unless there's a body involved. You're a ghost among the living, or worse, a walking moral landfill. You pass the weaver's shop. She once gave you a patch of linen for free after you helped bury her cousin. The next day, her goat keeled over, and she blamed you, took the cloth back, refused to make eye contact since. You try not to take it personally. People are frightened, and fear makes rules of its own. In the pub, where you're technically allowed, but definitely not welcomed, you take a seat by the fireplace, in the darkest, coldest corner. The barkeep gives you a nod, the kind that says, I saw you, but also please don't touch anything. He brings you a half pint of mead and places it on the table with the delicacy of someone handling a trap. It's warm, slightly sour, but it goes down smooth enough. You savor it. Not just the drink, but the moment of silence, of being somewhere with a roof and fire and no corpses. Yet, the door swings open. Cold air and tension follow. A boy steps in, out of breath. His eyes scan the room, land on you, and widen with a mix of hope and dread. There's been a death? Of course there has. You drain the last of your mead, leave a coin, too clean, probably, and rise. The boy stays back. as if you might explode into unholy Latin again. You nod. He turns and bolts back into the cold, like he's trying to outrun your shadow. You follow slower, always slower. As you walk through the village, you notice the signs, curtains drawn, a single candle in the window, quiet whispers behind closed shutters. Grief wears the same coat in every house. It just smells different depending on who's cooking. You arrive at the edge of a small cottage near the mill. A man lies in the front room, surrounded by family. His face is pale, expression calm. The bread has already been placed, black as peat, and just as appetizing. You nod to the widow. She nods back, barely. Her fingers tremble. You kneel. This man's sins now rest on your menu. Was he kind? Was he cruel? It doesn't matter. You chew through them all the same. One bite for the harsh words, one for the unpaid debts, one for the thing he did that no one talks about, not even now. This time it tastes sour. The daughter watches you, eyes wide, like she's waiting for you to burst into flames. You don't. You just finish your meal and whisper the last words. May your soul be lighter than mine. You rise. No applause, no thanks. Just a shuffle back to the door as the room exhales relief. Outside, a woman crosses herself. Another spits. Again. Historians still argue whether sin eaters were revered in secret or merely pitied. Some say they were closer to spiritual mercenaries, taking the weight others couldn't carry. Others think they were just scapegoats, vessels for social guilt in communities where the church was too clean to get its hands dirty. You'd settle for a dry place to sleep and a cup of warm ale. Back in the woodshed, you call home. You light a stub of tallow candle and sit by its flicker. The wind whispers through the boards like a hymn half remembered. You press your hands to your face, still cold from the graveside wind. It's not the bread that bothers you, it's the silence afterward. Because for a moment, as you eat, you feel the weight of someone else's life. Not just their sins, but their joy too. The laughter, the songs, the things they never finished. And then it's gone. You curl up in the corner and try not to think about how full your soul must be by now. Full of stories that aren't yours. There are two truths about being a sin eater. 1. You're never invited to a wedding. 2. You're always expected at a funeral. You've barely finished your bread turned confessionals from yesterday when another knock comes at the door. Not a polite one. No. This one sounds like someone trying to break in with their knuckles. You already know what it means. You open it to find a red-faced farmhand, soaked from the waist down in creek water, mumbling something about his uncle in a pitchfork accident. You don't ask for details. You just grab your satchel, your bread, and what's left of your dignity, and follow. The walk to the next hamlet is long, soggy, and filled with the kind of rain that feels like it's judging you. Wet wool clings to your limbs. Your boots squish like irritated frogs. By the time you arrive, your clothes could stand up on their own from sheer damp misery. The dead man lies in a tool shed, wrapped in a plaid blanket and surrounded by 3 sheep and a chicken who seem unusually invested in your arrival. The family stands a few paces back, none making eye contact, except the youngest daughter who stares at you like you're a monster from a bedtime tale. And in some way you are. They lay the bread gently across the chest. It's oatcake this time. A nice change. You murmur the usual phrases, though you're fairly certain you've been making them up for the past 5 years. No one ever corrects you. It's not about words, it's about weight. As you eat, you feel the shift again, an almost imperceptible pull in your gut, like your soul adjusting to make room. Guilt settling into the folds of your memory. Grief sinking into your marrow, like winter damp. The chicken clucks once and walks out. You envy her. Afterward, the eldest son gives you 3 pennies wrapped in cloth. A kind gesture, though the cloth smells faintly of turpentine. You pocket both anyway. You're not in a position to refuse anything short of a plague mask and a handshake. You start walking back before anyone can change their minds. The road is quiet. Only the crows seem to take interest in you. One follows for half a mile, landing on branches just ahead, watching. You name it regret, and continue walking. Midway back, you pass a crumbling stone chapel, long abandoned, its roof caved and moss swallowing the altar inside. You pause here sometimes, not to pray exactly, just to be. It's one of the few places no one follows. Even the priest avoids this ruin. Inside, it smells of wet stone, lichen, and memory. You sit in what used to be the back pew, your knees aching in rhythm with the rain outside. People say you're unclean, tainted. But sometimes you wonder, what if it's the opposite? What if you're the cleanest one here? Historians still argue whether sin eaters were performing literal atonement or just absorbing communal grief so others didn't have to feel it. One theory suggests it was a way for tight knit rural communities to externalize shame, wrap it up in a man with bad teeth and a lot of bread, and carry on as if nothing had happened. It worked mostly, but you know what it feels like to carry that shame home. What it's like to dream someone else's regrets. To wake up whispering names you never knew. You don't linger too long. The roof creaks in a way that suggests it's one raccoon away from collapse. You step out and keep walking, your cloak steaming faintly under a rare sunbeam. Back in the village, you spot the priest again. He's lecturing a group of boys outside the chapel. Something about sin. He catches your eye and stiffens. The boys fall silent, some staring wide-eyed, others backing away. You raise a hand in greeting. He does not return it. He hasn't spoken to you since the funeral of his own brother. You weren't invited, but you showed up anyway. The family begged. The priest refused. You stood just outside the graveyard fence, eating the bread alone, leaning on a lichen-covered post. When you left the coins on the stone wall beside the gate. He never said thank you. He did stop preaching for 3 weeks, though. You reach your shed and collapse into a rickety chair with a groan. The seat protests, but doesn't break. Small blessings. You light a stub of candle and watch the flame. It's the only light that doesn't flinch from you. In a world that won't look you in the eye, even fire becomes a kind of friend. You stare at the 3 pennies for a long time. They're small, battered, and one is bent, like it's been stepped on by a horse with a gambling problem. You lay them on the table, side by side, as if they might whisper secrets if you squint hard enough. Instead, they whisper poverty. It's not just about the money, it's about what it represents. You ate a man's entire lifetime of sins, and this is the wage. You'd earn more mucking out stables with fewer haunting dreams and less social exile. You wonder sometimes if the townsfolk think you're paid in some divine favor, that maybe by devouring sins, you've got a fast lane to heaven. That would be funny if your knees didn't ache so badly. You tuck the coins into a leather pouch that jingles like a guilt-riddled maraca and set out again. A wind has picked up. It tears down from the hills and through the narrow lanes like it has somewhere to be. You pull your cloak tighter and keep your eyes low. People still don't look at you. But today, you swear, they're looking even less than usual. The baker turns his back completely. The weaver pretends to have gone deaf. It hits you when you pass the mill. There's a new rumor. Someone's spreading it. Maybe you're cursing the dead instead of cleansing them. Maybe your bread is poisoned. Maybe you're the reason old Tom's chickens stopped laying, or why that infant didn't survive the fever. Maybe. It doesn't matter if it's true. Folk superstition doesn't need logic, just a seed and the right kind of fear. You try to ignore it. You've weathered whispers before, but still, you find yourself walking differently, quieter, like even your footsteps might offend. By mid afternoon, the rain returns. Not the polite drizzle from earlier, but the full theatrical performance. The kind of downpour that makes you question if you're being punished for someone else's sins or your own. You take shelter under the overhang of a tool shed. It smells like wet rope and resentment. A dog nearby growls softly and then trots away, clearly unimpressed. While you wait for the clouds to lose interest, you unwrap the oatcake from your last funeral. It's gone a little green around the edges. You break off the cleanest piece and chew thoughtfully. You used to love bread, not anymore. You miss things you never had: hot soup, clean sheets, someone humming in the next room, the sound of your name said with fondness instead of fear. The rain slows. You head back into the village. At the square, you find a small crowd huddled near the stocks. A man is locked in, dripping wet and red faced. He's yelling something about goats and a misplaced bucket. You recognize the constable, plump, smug, and always slightly out of breath. Then you hear it. Should send the sin eater instead. A few people chuckle. The constable doesn't laugh, but he doesn't disagree either. You keep walking. Words don't break bones, but they do bruise pride. Historians still argue whether sin eaters were ever truly feared or simply tolerated. An unpleasant necessity, like rats in a granary or taxes. Some accounts call them cursed. Others call them blessed. None call them happy. You reach the cottage at the edge of the village. A woman opens the door with caution, her face pulled tight with grief. You don't need her to speak. The candle in the window says enough. Inside, the air is thick with rosemary and ash. The body is laid out under a woolen quilt. The bread is on the table beside him, still warm. You glance at her. She nods. You perform the rite slowly, each motion practiced, each word the same. But today it feels heavier. You press the bread to his chest. You eat. You breathe deeply through your nose, hoping to catch something sweet in the air. All you find is regret and cinnamon. Afterward, she hands you a small pouch. Not coins this time. A thimble. Her husband's. Silver. Slightly dented. For your coat, she says. You don't argue. You just nod. Outside, the clouds have broken. Sunlight spills over the thatched roofs and cobbled streets, like the village is trying to redeem itself with lighting. You walk slowly, thoughtfully. You don't feel lighter, just carried, like someone else is walking with you, even if they're no longer breathing. The next morning, you find yourself in a position that feels vaguely heroic, teaching a younger man how to eat sin like a pro. Not by choice, mind you. He just showed up outside your shed at dawn, eyes wide with that dangerous combination of fear and curiosity that usually ends with someone bleeding or converted. His name is Dewey, probably 19, probably desperate. He says his uncle used to be a sin eater, died last month, fell into a stream, drunk, during a funeral and floated downstream with a half-eaten scone in his pocket. Poetic, really. Now, Dewey's family thinks the gift runs in the blood. They gave him a sack of bread, a wooden cup, and instructions to go find the one who smells like vinegar and sadness. That's how you know he's here for you. You don't particularly want a protege, but there's something about the way he holds the bread, like it might hiss and bite, that makes you sigh and motion him over. Watch, then try, you say, voice still rusty from sleep and disuse. You go over the steps, the bread pressing, the muttering, the chewing while pretending you're not standing inches from a man who recently leaked his spirit into the ether. Today's corpse is old, toothless, and covered in wool. Probably a shepherd. Dewey stands frozen as the family watches. You nudge him gently forward. Say the words. I don't know them. Neither do I. He swallows. Looks like he might bolt, but he doesn't. He kneels, presses the bread, mumbles something that might be a blessing, or the lyrics to a sheep counting song, and then he bites. The family exhales. The ritual is done. Another soul, swept out like crumbs from a dinner plate. On the walk back, Dewey asks questions. Do you feel different afterward? What if you eat the sins of someone really evil? What happens if you do it wrong? You shrug. You dream strange, that's all. He nods solemnly, but you can tell he's not sure if you're joking. Neither are you. You pause at a stream to refill your flask. Dewey skips stones, trying to hit a log. He finally manages, looks proud, and asks, What's the worst one you ever ate? You stare at the water for a moment. The current mutters back in its slippery language. Little girl, you say, not her fault, but she died afraid, full of sorrow. No bread should carry that weight. Dewey goes quiet. You don't feel the silence. Historians still argue whether sin eating actually worked, or if it was just a communal placebo. Did villagers feel better because someone else had taken on the burden? Was it magic, or just ritualistic psychology? You don't know, but you do know this. There's something sacred in pretending, in acting out the process of release. And sometimes, that's all a grieving family really needs. You return to your shed and offer Dewey a crust of bread that hasn't been near any corpses. He eats like a man who hasn't tasted food in days. Ma, you'll get used to the taste, you say. Of sin? No, you reply. Of being alone. It lands heavier than intended. You try to lighten the moment by pointing out the goat, still chewing your laundry line, and he actually laughs. A real one. Short, surprised, and gone too soon, but still. You give him an old scarf. Not out of kindness. You just can't stand watching him shiver. Later that night, you lie awake, listening to the wind and the tiny crackle of a fire made from damp twigs and blind optimism. Dewey sleeps, curled near the hearth, mumbling something about a cat in a wheelbarrow. You remember your first night too, alone, shaking, wondering if you'd accidentally made a pact with something older than the church. You didn't sleep much that night either. Outside, an owl hoots. Or maybe it's just the wind playing tricks again. The fire throws odd shadows, and for a moment, you think you see something stir near the door. You blink. Nothing. Just bread, bones, and the boy with too many questions. By mid-morning, Dewey is gone. Not like gone, just not inside. You find him squatting beside the creek behind your shed, flicking pebbles into the water and talking to a beetle as if it's offering tax advice. You don't interrupt. That's part of the job, too. Long pauses, weirder coping mechanisms. You hand him a crust of bread and sit beside him. So, he says, mouth full, do people ever thank you? You almost choke laughing. No, you say. But sometimes they don't throw things. That's something. He chews slower after that. Today is one of those rare days when the sun seems confused and decides to shine. The grass squints. The sheep look offended. And you? You use the warmth to dry your only pair of socks on a bush. They're steaming faintly, like lost souls trying to escape through the wool. You both get the news around noon. A boy, red-faced, breathing like a bellows, runs up the hill. There's a body. Down by the marsh. Old Dafit, the cobbler. You sigh. Dewey sighs louder. You arrive to find the man, already wrapped in a cloak, face peaceful, mouth agape. The bread's been forgotten. Typical. You carry a spare. It's slightly crushed, having traveled in your satchel under 3 turnips and a jar of questionable jam, but it'll do. You kneel, nod at the family, and begin. Dewey stands back, unsure. Go on, you whisper, and press the bread. He does, you mutter. He repeats, one beat behind. When it's time to eat, Dewey hesitates. I'm not hungry. It's not about hunger. But what if I mess it up? You glance around. No angels descending, no lightning bolts. Just a grieving widow and a curious sheep watching from the fence. You won't. He takes the bite, winces, chews like it's full of gravel and secrets. It's done. Afterward, you both sit by the marsh for a while. The reeds wave gently like an audience, unsure whether to applaud. Do you think it works? Dewey asks. The sin part? You consider, not sure, but it helps the living. Historians still argue whether the practice had any real theological backing. Some claim it was a leftover druidic rite, dressed up in crumbs and desperation. Others believe it was a silent protest, a people's ritual to reclaim death from the clergy's grasp, a sort of spiritual bootlegging. Whatever the reason, it persists. You look over at Dewey. You could stop, you say. No one will chase you if you run. He shakes his head. Already feel too far in, like I've started something. You know the feeling. The sun dips behind a hill and the air sharpens, turning breath into smoke. You head back, each step squelching through marsh, mud, and regret. At the village edge, you hear laughter. Not yours, not Dewey's. Children are gathered near the well, telling stories. One of them sees you and stops. There he is, she cries. He eats sins. My uncle says he swallowed a murderer once and grew a tail. The others gasp. You raise an eyebrow. Do I look like I have a tail? They scream and run. Dewey tries not to laugh. You fail. Back at the shed, you share your dinner. Half a turnip and some jam, with strong opinions. It tastes like someone dared sugar to wrestle vinegar and forgot to break it up. Delicious, Dewey lies. Sinfully good, you deadpan. You both groan at the pun. Later, as the fire dwindles, Dewey asks one more question. What happens to your sins? You blink at the ceiling. No one's ever asked that before. I guess I carry them, you murmur, until someone eats mine. Silence follows, heavy, thoughtful. Outside, the goat coughs, possibly in judgment. You close your eyes, half expecting to dream of old Dafid's debts or his final argument about shoe polish. Instead, you sleep deeper than expected. Dewey's presence shifts the weight. Not lighter, just shared. And that's something. You wake up with straw in your hair and a goat nibbling your sleeve. Dewey's already outside, trying to boil water over a fire that can't decide whether to exist. He's poking it with a stick like the flames personally insulted him. You know that's a cooking fire, right? You ask. He looks up, eyebrows raised. I'm not trying to cook. I'm trying to boil judgment out of this kettle. You nod solemnly. Should only take a decade. You stretch, your joints making a series of sounds that suggest they're reconsidering their contract with your skeleton. Outside, it's misty again, Wales in its default setting. Everything smells like moss, wet wood, and unsent apologies. A man appears on the trail, broad shoulders, dark cloak, the look of someone who once punched a cow and still won the argument. He doesn't greet you, just stands with arms crossed. My father passed last night, he says. Come by sundown. Then he drops a coin purse in the mud and walks off. Dewey waits until he's out of earshot. Charming fellow, you scoop the purse. 3 coins. One is bent, one is still warm. The third has a hole through it, like it used to be a necklace or maybe shot at out of boredom. I've met worse, you say. Sundown comes quickly. The funeral is quiet. Just the son, a cousin, and an elderly woman who may or may not be asleep standing up. No priest, no scripture, just you and the bread and the echoes of a man who once raised horses and lowered expectations. This time Dewey leads. He presses the bread, says the words without stumbling. He eats, slowly, solemnly. You stand back and watch. The son doesn't speak, just grunts and lights a pipe. But as you leave, he tosses you a flask. Was his, he says. He'd want it used. Inside, strong stuff. Smells like peat and internal bleeding. You both take a sip. Dewey coughs like he's just swallowed fire. Wrapped in socks. You both laugh. That night, you lie by the hearth, the flask tucked near your boots. Dewey starts talking again, low and rambling. How'd you become a sin eater? You sigh. My father was one, and his before him. It wasn't a job. It was a hand-me-down. He nods. And before that, you smile faintly. Before that, I wanted to be a poet. Dewey snorts. No, really. Wrote a whole verse about clouds once. Compared them to sheep. It was deeply average. He chuckles. Do you remember it? You think. Something about wool and rain and inevitable disappointment. Sounds Welsh. Exactly. The fire crackles softly. The wind outside hums through the gaps in the boards like an old man practicing the flute. You look over at Dewey. He's quiet now, staring into the flames like they might spell out his future. You don't have to stay, you tell him. I know. You're not bound to this. It doesn't own you. I know that too. He doesn't move. You don't push it. Historians still argue whether sin eaters were truly volunteers or forced into it by poverty and lineage. The truth is likely both. No one chooses this life. They arrive at it, slowly, like water finding a crack in the stone. Later you step outside. The sky is clear for once, full of stars that look like spilled salt. You breathe deep, letting the cold clean your lungs. Somewhere in the valley, a dog barks. Somewhere else, someone weeps. You wrap your cloak tighter and head back in. Inside, Dewey's already asleep, curled around the flask like a cat with questionable priorities. You smile. Then, you sit by the fire, take out a scrap of paper, and begin to write. The boy came with bread and questions, eyes full of sinless wonder, and left with silence curling behind his ribs. Poetry, like sin eating, is mostly about pretending you know what you're doing. Morning arrives, dressed in fog and indecision. The light trickles in late, like it's not sure it wants to be here. You stretch, bones cracking like poorly tuned instruments, and glance over. Dewey is already up, standing outside, facing the mist, arms crossed, the very picture of dramatic reflection. Or possibly, he's just cold and too proud to admit it. You join him, cloaks pulled tight. The world is muffled. Even the birds are quiet, as if nature itself is tiptoeing around a funeral no one scheduled. Then comes the news. A woman arrives, her bonnet drooping, eyes red, voice small. It's my daughter, she says. She was only 13. Your chest tightens. There's always something worse than yesterday. You don't ask how. You never do. Details don't change what needs doing. But this one hits differently. Dewey's expression falters. He doesn't speak, just nods and goes to fetch the bread. The cottage is still and full of flowers that do nothing to cover the sharp edge of grief. The girl lies there, hair braided neatly, cheeks pale but peaceful. The mother places the bread with trembling hands. I couldn't bear to do it myself, she says. You nod. Of course. Dewey hesitates. I can take this one, you whisper. But he shakes his head. He kneels, presses the bread, whispers the prayer. Then he eats, slowly, respectfully. A ritual becomes a reverence. Outside, the mother weeps into her apron. You stand beside her in silence, offering nothing but presence. Sometimes that's the only kindness you can afford. You and Dewey walk home without speaking. The air is heavier, not just from the death, but from the weight of understanding. You feel it settle in his shoulders. The recognition that some burdens aren't metaphor, they're just real. Back at the shed, he sits by the fire for a long time, staring into the flames. Finally, he speaks. She was just a child. You nod. They always are to someone. I didn't know it'd feel like this. No one does. He doesn't cry, but his jaw tightens. His fists clench in his lap. You hand him the old tin cup and pour him a bit of the peat fire flask. He drinks. Doesn't cough this time. Progress. Historians still argue whether sin eating was ever meant to apply to children. Theologically, the church claimed they died innocent, pure of soul. But in the villages, grief doesn't follow doctrine. If it hurts, it must be cleansed. If it's gone, it must be released. So the ritual stayed, and you eat. Because someone has to. That night, the dreams return. You're walking through a meadow. The sky is wrong, greenish and low. The wind carries voices, none of them yours. Bread grows on trees. Graves bloom with flowers that hum, hymns off key. You reach the girl. She smiles, hands you a stone. When you wake, your fingers are curled around nothing, but they ache like they held something important. You step outside into the pre-dawn chill, the goat trailing behind you like a furry, judgmental shadow. In the east, the sky is warming. A pale gold creeps over the hills. A new day, new sins, new bread, and somewhere, someone who will need you soon. You breathe in the damp, soil-sweet air. Dewey joins you silently. You don't speak. You don't need to. You just stand there, side by side, watching the world begin again, with empty hands and full hearts. By late afternoon, the wind has teeth. It bites at your ears, nips at your fingertips, and reminds every joint that you've lived a life made more of trudging than resting. Dewey tries to block it with a scarf wrapped 3 times around his neck, looking like a very worried onion. You're both headed to a farmstead on the northern ridge. It's the kind of place you only visit when someone's either very old, very isolated, or very unloved. Sometimes all 3. The path winds through gorse and stone fences, past sheep who stare at you like you owe them something. Dewey kicks a rock. It kicks back by embedding itself in his boot. He hops the rest of the way, muttering curses that involve turnips and divine vengeance. When you arrive, there's no welcome, just a man standing by the door, arms folded, face like granite in a thunderstorm. Inside, he says, you find the body on a bench, wrapped in linen. No bread. Of course, she didn't believe in all that, the man says. Said sin eaters were superstition. You nod. So why call us now? He looks away. She changed her mind. You and Dewey exchange a glance. You've seen this before. The deathbed panic. The final minute scramble for absolution. When fire and brimstone becomes less metaphor, more real estate planning. You offer him your spare bread. Slightly stale, slightly damp, perfectly miserable. The man accepts it like it might explode. Dewey kneels, his movements slower than usual. He speaks the words, but his voice cracks on the final line. You finish it for him, Together, you eat. It's always strange how the act itself is so quiet, so small, compared to what it's supposed to represent. All this talk of spiritual cleansing, and yet it's just two tired men chewing damp bread in a room that smells like boiled cabbage and long held secrets. Afterward, the man says nothing. He simply hands you a wooden spoon. She made that, he says. You thank him. He shuts the door behind you. Dewey turns the spoon in his hand. People are weird. You grin. That's the job description. The walk home is cold. Rain flirts with the horizon but doesn't commit. The sky stays that sickly gray that suggests the sun has retired early. Back in the village, you find something unexpected. A parcel, wrapped in oilcloth, left at your door. You glance around, half expecting to catch a prankster ducking behind a haystack. But no, just the wind and the goat and your shadow. Inside the parcel, fresh bread, two small wheels of cheese, a note for what you carry. No name, no signature, just that. You sit down slowly. Dewey stares at the note like it might sprout legs and explain itself. Someone appreciates us? You nod, slowly, carefully, as if you might scare the moment away. He tears off a piece of cheese and takes a bite. Still tastes like socks, he mumbles, but good socks. You both laugh. Historians still argue whether sin eaters were ever respected. Some tales speak of them being given small gifts, eggs, meat, even clothes, but always in secret. No one publicly honors the man who eats death, but sometimes someone remembers that carrying darkness for others is its own kind of light. That night, you carve a notch into the shed wall, not for the body, not for the job, for the parcel, for the anonymous kindness. You sit by the fire with the wooden spoon in your hand and the note beside your cup. Dewey's already snoring, curled under the world's lumpiest blanket. The wind whistles through the cracks, gentler now. You stare at the flickering shadows on the wall, and for once, they don't look like ghosts. They look like shapes of something soft, something earned. You didn't expect the chicken. No one ever does. It begins as most funerals do. Rain, sighs, and someone loudly asking if the bread is blessed or just moldy. You and Dewey arrive late. Not your fault. The wheelbarrow lost a wheel. You were both inside it at the time, trying to stay dry. The deceased? Old Thomas. A local fixture. Cobbler. Part-time beekeeper. Full-time gossip sponge. Famous for once kicking a priest, for being smug on a Wednesday. His house is full. Neighbors, cousins, a man who may or may not be his sworn enemy. No one's quite sure. You squeeze in, damp and grimacing, to find Thomas laid out on a bench by the hearth. The air smells like damp wool and turnip soup. Not ideal, but manageable. The bread is already on his chest. Oatcake again, cracked in two, like the family started to eat it and then remembered its purpose. Dewey steps forward, presses the bread, whispers the words. Then, bang, the bench collapses. Thomas rolls, bread flying. Dewey jumps back. You lunge and catch the body mid-tumble, managing to guide him to the floor without significant dignity loss. And that's when the chicken enters. No one knows where it came from. Maybe it lived under the table. Maybe it was Thomas's soul. It jumps onto the corpse's chest and begins pecking, furiously, rhythmically, like it's conducting a barnyard exorcism. Gasps. A scream. Someone yells, "It's possessed!" Someone else throws a cabbage. Chaos. You catch the chicken. It bites you. Dewey takes the bread and finishes the rite, while half the family argues theology and poultry. By the end, Thomas is back on a stable surface. The chicken is tied to a chair, and you're holding a cloth to your finger. Do we charge extra for poultry interference? Dewey asks. You nod solemnly. That was at least worth a scone. After the family settles, a woman, Thomas's daughter maybe, approaches you. I'm sorry about the fuss, she says. He was always a bit theatrical. She hands you a coin in a jar. Elderberry preserves, she adds. He would have wanted you to have it. You thank her and leave quickly before another animal joins the drama. Back at the shed, Dewey carefully sets the jar on the shelf beside the now wholly wooden spoon and mysterious cheese parcel. We're starting a collection, he says, of edible apologies. You bandage your finger with a strip of rag and collapse into your chair, chuckling. Think we'll ever get a ham? Too blessed, Dewey says. People only give hams to priests or very lucky pigs. You both laugh. The kind of tired, helpless laughter that comes from surviving something absurd. Historians still argue whether funerary animals were a common part of rural Welsh tradition or just a product of over-imaginative oral histories. Chickens, cats, even the occasional sheep were said to sense the spirit. More likely, they sensed unattended food and confusion. But you know this, never trust a chicken at a funeral. That night, as the wind dies down and the fire settles into a quiet purr, you can't sleep. Your finger throbs. Your mind replays the image of Thomas mid-air, the chicken crowing in Latin, probably, and Dewey deadpan, eating the sin cake like it's a Tuesday lunch. You smile. Life's strange. Death? Stranger? You finally drift off, head resting against the wall, dreams soft and chicken-free, for now. You wake to a sound that can only be described as apologetic knocking. Like someone's trying not to summon you, but must. You open the door to find a boy no older than 10, soaked to the bone, holding a single slice of bread in a shaking hand. Ma'am says, please come. It's Da, he whispers. She says you'll know what to do. You do. You always do. You wrap yourself in your thickest cloak, nod at Dewey, already halfway into his boots, and follow the boy down the mist-threaded trail into a part of the valley that doesn't often call for sin eaters. New houses, whitewashed walls, people who read scripture from printed books, not from memory. The house is too clean, the air too still. Inside, a man lies on the floor, face pale, hand curled around a wooden cross. The wife, young, trembling, can't meet your eyes, but she nods toward the bread on the table. He didn't want this, she whispers, but I do. That's enough. You perform the rite with your usual care. Dewey joins you, steady and soft. The silence in the room is the thick kind, weighted with things unsaid and prayers spoken too late. Afterward, the boy offers you a folded handkerchief. This was Da's, he says. It's lucky. You hesitate, then take it. Thank you. Outside, the fog is clearing. You walk a bit before Dewey finally speaks. Do you think it matters if they believe? You think for a long while before answering. No, it matters that we do. He nods. That afternoon, you decide to clean the shed. Well, clean may be a stretch. More like relocate the filth and contemplate life's choices. Dewey uncovers a box of oddments, old buttons, broken rosary beads, bits of cloth that smell like unrepentant history. You find your father's spoon, wood, cracked, dark with use. You remember the way he held it like a scepter, the way he used it to scoop soup and symbolism with equal gravitas. You hang it on a nail beside your own spoon. Dewey watches. He was a sin eater too? You nod. The best I ever knew. He used to say the bread wasn't just bread, it was memory. Dewey frowns. I thought it was symbolic. It is, and also literal. Like most things in life, you offer him a tin of tea, leaves you found under a bucket. He sniffs it and coughs. Smells like despair. So, authentic then. You sit outside and brew a pot. It tastes like bitter moss, but warms the hands. You both stare at the horizon. Do you ever want to stop? Dewey asks quietly. You sip your tea. All the time. So why don't you? You stare at the clouds crawling across the hilltops, heavy with whatever they've gathered from the sea. Because when someone dies, the living needs something, a gesture, a crumb of peace. And we're the crumb? We're the whole soggy loaf. He laughs, not loudly, but genuinely. Historians still argue whether the sin eater's role was a sign of lingering pagan traditions or a desperate adaptation to Christian guilt. The line between folklore and faith is thin in Wales, sometimes no more than a fog bank wide. Maybe it wasn't religion. Maybe it was just grief's ritual shape. You finish your tea and toss the leaves to the wind. Tomorrow, you say, we'll fix the roof. Dowie groans. I'd rather eat 5 sins and a raw turnip. You will. The stars peek out early tonight. The wind hums something soft and low. Inside, the handkerchief from the boy sits folded on your table. You stare at it for a while, then tuck it into your coat pocket. Lucky or not, it's now part of the life you carry. You go to sleep early, warmed by tea, company, and the quiet knowledge that, against all odds, today didn't completely suck. Fixing the roof is, in theory, a straightforward task. In reality, it's you and Dewey clambering over rotten timbers with the grace of two overfed squirrels wearing cloaks. The goat watches from below, unimpressed. At one point, Dewey nearly falls into the stew pot. You nearly fall into Dewey. There is yelling. There is cursing. PG rated, of course. There is a moment where you consider whether being struck by a falling slate might be a valid retirement plan. But by noon, the leak is patched with a mix of moss, tar, and stubbornness. You declare victory. Dewey declares mild concussion. Lunch is cheese and bread. Non-ritualistic, though neither of you can eat bread anymore without inspecting it first, like it might whisper someone's secrets mid-bite. Just as you settle in, a letter arrives. An actual letter, parchment, wax seal, delivered by a boy wearing the world's most serious expression. You break the seal with a butter knife, because dignity is for people with proper utensils. The message reads, we request your presence at the manor. A burial is scheduled at dusk. Payment will be made. Hugh, Meredith, Steward. You blink. Well, Dewey mutters, we've been summoned, like important people, or cursed relics. You brush the crumbs from your coat and begin the walk up the hill. The Meredith estate sits like a smug stone crown over the village. 3 chimneys, 12 windows, 0 hospitality. Inside, a woman greets you with all the warmth of a winter puddle. The Lord is in his room. He requested a traditional rite. There will be no sermon. You're led up a wide staircase that groans underfoot. At the top, the late Lord Meredith lies in state, surrounded by flowers that fail to mask the smell of brandy and disuse. He wears a silk robe and an expression of moderate surprise. You perform the ritual with care. Even here, among wealth and carved oak and imported candles, the act is the same. Bread, prayer, chew, silence. Dewey stands back, nervous. The steward watches with faint disgust, like you might start juggling or drop crumbs on the tapestry. When you finish, no one thanks you. The woman just holds out a cloth pouch. Payment, she says, and a warning. Do not speak of this to others. You nod. Not your first bribe. You leave with coins and silence. Back at the shed, you count the payment. 10 silver. 10. Enough to buy new boots, a coat, maybe even a day off. Dewey stares at the pile. That much? For one? He was nobility. Did his sins taste richer? No, just more important. You laugh, but it's short, because now you're thinking. How many of these rites have been done in secret? How many nobles hide their belief in a practice they claim is heresy? Historians still argue whether the rich employed sin eaters or preferred priests and prayers, but oral history suggests they did, often in secret. No sermons, no crosses, just bread, coin, and plausible deniability. You tuck the silver away, and that night you dream of silk sheets and silver knives. The sins taste no different, just colder. In the morning, Dewey says nothing about the manner. He just stirs porridge with the wooden spoon and hands you the less lumpy half. You eat in silence. And in that silence, something shifts. Not guilt, not pride. Just wait. One soul lighter, one coin heavier, and still so many left to go. The coin doesn't last long. It never does. By the end of the week, it's become a new kettle. Your old one had a crack that whistled unsettling hymns when it boiled. A pair of boots for Dewey, still a size too big. He insists it's for future growth. And a few jars of pickled vegetables that taste like regret preserved in vinegar. You do not regret it, but you do notice something. The villagers are starting to look at you differently. Not warmly, let's not get carried away, but less like you're an ambulatory shadow of doom and more like a regular nuisance. Someone to nod at from a safe distance. Someone to acknowledge. Even the baker offered you an actual greeting yesterday. It was but still, progress. It all makes you a little suspicious, if you're honest. So when a stranger shows up at your door just after dawn, you assume the balance of the universe is being restored. He's tall, thin, wearing a hat that's clearly never been near a sheep, and introduces himself as Mr. Branwell, antiquarian. Dewey mutters, "That's not a real job." Branwell ignores him. "I've come to ask about your practice," he says, stepping gingerly into your shed as though sin might be contagious through dust. "You here for a death?" "No, no," he chuckles, though his eyes don't. "Research, oral tradition. I'm writing a book on rural death rituals. You were recommended." "By who?" He waves a dismissive hand. "Sources. May I ask, how long have you been eating sins?" You cross your arms, long enough to forget what a clean conscience tastes like. He scribbles. He's one of those people who writes before you finish speaking. Dewey starts sweeping aggressively in the background, mostly to annoy him. Branwell peers at the shelf with your odd collection. The cheese, the wooden spoon, the elderberry preserves. He raises an eyebrow, but says nothing. "You must find the practice spiritually taxing," he ventures. You raise an eyebrow. "You ever try chewing dry oatcake beside a rotting corpse while being stared at by someone holding a dead chicken?" He doesn't write that down. He asks about the words you say, whether there's a fixed script. You shrug. "Depends on the family. Some like Latin, some like silence." "Fascinating," he murmurs, although he's clearly disappointed it's not more dramatic. He thanks you, leaves a coin that might cover a cup of cider, and vanishes back into whatever fog breeds people like that. Dewey watches him go. "Do you think he'll get it right in his book?" You snort. "He'll write whatever makes people feel smart at dinner parties." Historians still argue whether sin eaters were ever formally documented in their time or merely captured later through romanticized lenses. People like Branwell want folklore, drama, mystery. They rarely want the truth. mud, cold hands, and oatcakes that taste like damp regret. Later that evening, you're called to a house near the edge of the woods. A woman has passed, quietly in her sleep. Her daughter greets you at the door with red rimmed eyes and a small smile. She always believed in what you do, she says. Said it brought her comfort. The bread is fresh, still warm. Dewey handles this one. Calm, steady. You watch from a distance. The woman's dog sits beside her the whole time, tail thumping quietly against the floor. Not afraid, just there. After the rite, the daughter places something in your hand. A tiny carved figure, wooden, a bird. She made it when she was a girl. Said it would keep sadness away. You tuck it into your pocket. It does nothing to lighten your coat, but somehow your chest feels warmer. That night, you sit by the fire, the figure in one hand, the tea in the other. Dewey hums something tuneless as he stirs the stew. You look around the shed. It's still drafty, still crowded, still smells faintly of sorrow, but it's yours. And now, his too. You're no longer the only one carrying this weight, and that changes everything. The first snow arrives like a quiet insult. It doesn't blanket the world in soft white poetry. No, it shows up as slush, as sideways flakes that slap your face, as cold that seeps directly into your socks and whispers, you should have fixed the floorboards. Dewey is thrilled. It's festive, he announces, while your goat stares mournfully at the sky, clearly unimpressed by winter's theatrics. You trudge through it anyway, because a knock on your door rarely means anything good. This one came with urgency, a smudge of charcoal on the message, and the words, "Please come. She passed just now. We have no bread. You bring your own." It's hard and sad and slightly burnt. Perfect. You and Dewey reach the house, a crumbling two-story that's leaning more on hope than physics, and are greeted by an elderly man with watery eyes and a coat that once may have been green. "She was my sister," he says, then pauses. "I'm all that's left now." The room is filled with quiet, not the respectful kind, the kind that hangs heavy, like the house itself is holding its breath. You kneel. Dewey stands at your shoulder, holding the bread like a fragile relic. The woman is small, wrinkled like a well-read map, her hands folded, lips slightly parted. There's a sense she's listening, just not to anything in this world. You begin. The words fall slowly. Snow sifts through the cracks in the window like powdered ghosts. The rite ends without ceremony. Just two breaths, a nod, a shared glance. You offer the man the bread crust that remains. He presses it to his lips, kisses it like an heirloom, then places it gently beside her. No coin, no gift, just tears. You walk home in silence. The snow deepens, the wind sharpens. Halfway there, Dewey stops. "You think people ever did this for us?" he asks. You raise an eyebrow. "I mean, when we die. Who eats our sins? You consider this. Maybe no one does." "That's bleak." You nod. "That's winter." But he persists. "Wouldn't it be fair? We carry all this weight. Shouldn't someone carry ours?" Historians still argue whether sin eaters had their own rites performed. No records confirm it. Some say they were buried outside church grounds. Others claim another sin eater would step forward, an invisible, eternal chain of reluctant martyrs. Maybe they just went unnoticed. Maybe they didn't care. You reach the shed with hands like ice and noses red enough to qualify for folklore status. The fire inside is stubborn, but eventually agrees to live again. You thaw your feet and share a tin of broth that's more hope than meat. Dewey produces a bundle from his cloak. Surprise. It's bread, actual bread, soft, still warm, bought from the village baker. "With what money?" you ask. Sold my second best spoon? You blink. You only have one spoon. Not anymore. You both tear into it, like wolves raised on sorrow. It tastes like comfort. You eat slowly, not because you're full, but because it feels wrong to rush something that asks for nothing in return. Afterward, Dewey takes out the tiny wooden bird and balances it on the shelf. For luck, he says. You nod. Maybe one day, he adds, voice low, we'll have someone to eat our sins. You watch the firelight flicker against the walls, casting shapes that look like stories untold. And for once, you don't try to imagine the ending. You just sit in the glow of now. You sleep through the morning bells. Not that there are bells in the village, just that one blacksmith's goose who honks in despair at sunrise, a feathered, furious timepiece. But today, nothing wakes you. Not the wind battering the shutters. Not the goat snoring like a haunted accordion. Not even Dewey, who apparently went out early and returned with muddy boots and a stolen apple. He hands it to you. It rolled off a cart. I rescued it. You take a bite. It tastes of frost and mild guilt. Dewey sits by the fire, carving a stick with unnecessary intensity. No sin calls today? You shake your head. A rare reprieve. He keeps carving. Eventually asks, what's the worst one? You know what he means. You don't answer immediately. Let the fire crackle. Let the wind rearrange the snow outside into little monuments to nothing. Finally, he was a miller. Big man. Died suddenly. Wife said he drank too much. Might have hit her. Might have hit others. Whole village came to watch the rite. Dewey leans in. And I ate the bread. Said the words. And an old woman, his mother I think, spat on the ground and said I'd done him a kindness he never deserved. Silence. You think she was right? You shrug. Not my place. But you still did it. I always do it. Historians still argue whether sin eating was ever meant to be moral. Was it about forgiveness or just tradition? A checkbox on the long list of things that make loss bearable? You know this. Sometimes the bread feels heavier. That afternoon, you visit the village square, not to perform a rite, just to walk, to be seen, to remind people you're not a myth wrapped in mud. The baker offers you a roll, free. You check it for hidden symbolism before accepting. You've been busy, he says. People talk. Do they? Said you helped the Merediths. You nod. Quietly. The blacksmith waves you over, hands you a pair of gloves. Patched, worn, still warm. Too small for me, he mutters. Might fit your apprentice. Dewey is delighted. See? He grins. We're local celebrities. Bread, gloves, suspicious stares. What more could a sin eater want? You chuckle. But it lingers. That question. What do you want? That night, you sit by the fire, with the gloves on your lap. They don't quite match, but they're soft, hand-stitched, personal. You watch Dewey clean out the tea kettle with more care than necessary. Do you miss anything? He asks. Miss? From before. You stare at the fire. Music, you say at last. There used to be singing, at births, at harvests, even at funerals. People forget how to sing when they're scared. Dewey pulls out a small tin whistle from his satchel. You play? You ask. No, but I thought I might try. The first note is not great. The second is worse. But the third is almost something. You laugh so hard you choke on your tea. He grins. Practice. And you sit there, two sin eaters in a wooden shed, one attempting music, the other attempting patience, while snow dusts the windows and shadows curl softly around your feet. No rites today, just warmth. And something dangerously close to joy. The next death is announced by bell. Not a church bell. Again, the village has no such luxury, but the iron triangle outside the pub. usually reserved for fire warnings or the arrival of cider shipments. So when it rings 3 times just after noon, everyone stops. A man has died at the Crossroads Inn, a traveler. No family, no name, just a room key and a purse of foreign coins. You and Dewey arrive before the constable, which seems fitting. The innkeeper meets you at the door. We found him this morning, quiet. Looked like he was sleeping, except for the not breathing. You nod. The man's body lies neatly on the bed, hands folded over his chest, as if he arranged himself before death. He's clean shaven, well dressed, and unfamiliar. Beside him, a loaf of spelt bread, unsliced, still wrapped. Left that on the table, the innkeeper explains. Maybe he knew. Dewey stares at the bread. Imported guilt? You perform the rite with extra care. Foreign sins always feel different. Not heavier, not darker, just flavored with another kind of grief. No one watches, no one mourns, but you eat anyway, because someone should. Afterward, you find a folded note beneath the man's pillow. No name, no farewell, just a sentence. Tell no one my sins, let them die with me. You burn it in the hearth. Historians still argue whether travelers and strangers received sin-eating rites. Some claim it was a local-only custom, reserved for kin and neighbors. Others believe any soul, if present, deserved cleansing. You lean toward the latter, not for theology, for kindness. On the walk back, Dewey asks, "What happens when we die somewhere no one knows us?" You look at him. Then we hope someone does it anyway. Even without bread? Especially without bread. That evening, the constable visits, late, nervous. Don't tell the bishop, he says, glancing at the ashes in your hearth. We're not supposed to do that anymore. You don't answer. He drops 2 coins on your table and leaves without another word. Dewey pockets one, flips it in the air. We're either saints or criminals, possibly both. He smirks. If they ever arrest us, can I keep the kettle? You can have the goat. The wind picks up outside. Trees rattle like bones shaking off a chill. Inside, the fire warms your knees. The goat farts once and looks offended, as if someone else did it. You eat soup made from questionable vegetables. Dewey practices the tin whistle. It sounds less like a wounded duck now, more like a confused pigeon. Progress. You glance at the shelf. A wooden bird, a handkerchief, a tin of elderberry preserves, and now 2 foreign coins. A life remembered not by name, but by bread and fire. You wonder if that's enough. Then Dewey offers you the rest of his soup, and you think, maybe it is. It starts with laughter, not yours, and definitely not Dewey's. It echoes down the hillside, unnatural and out of place. Joy has a particular tone, and this one is just slightly off. Like it got tuned by someone who'd only ever heard joy described, but never actually felt it. You and Dewey look at each other. Witches, he suggests, half joking. At tourists, you counter, equally grim. Turns out it's neither. It's a wedding, an actual wedding. The village hasn't had one in years. Not since old Padrig accidentally married his cousin because he misread the parish book. That put a bit of a damper on things. But today, a young couple from the next valley has decided to tie the knot here. Why? No one knows. Perhaps they liked the fog. Or perhaps it was the tavern discount. You and Dewey, of course, are not invited. But you watch from a distance, perched on a low stone wall, sharing the world's driest biscuit and an opinion or two. They're dancing, Dewey says. Barefoot, you add. They'll regret that by morning. The bride throws a flower crown. A girl catches it. Cheers erupt. A fiddler plays something fast and joyful, and for a second, it's almost infectious. Almost. And then someone spots you. A boy. Small. Freckled. Curious. He walks over, hands clasped behind his back, like a scholar addressing a ghost. You're the ones who eat sins? You blink. Yes, you say. Does it taste bad? You think. Sometimes. He considers this, then nods and walks away. You and Dewey don't speak again until the music fades. Later, back in your shed, you find something on the doorstep. A roll. Wrapped in cloth. Still warm. No note. Just that, Dewey picks it up and sniffs. Wedding roll. You raise an eyebrow. Sweet. Has raisins and a hint of optimism. He breaks it in half. You each eat a piece in silence. Historians still argue whether sin eaters were ever honored during weddings. Most say no, births and unions were for the living, not the cleaners of the dead, but some old tales mention them receiving scraps of cake or wine at the edge of a feast, like distant uncles invited out of obligation. You've never been one for parties, but the bread? It was good. That night, Dewey tries playing a wedding tune on his tin whistle. He gets halfway before it turns mournful, almost by accident. He shrugs. Can't help it. You sip tea and watch the stars. They're sharp tonight. Cold, distant, but still there. Dewey sets the whistle down. Would you have wanted a wedding? You smile. Only if it involved goats and questionable cheese. Romantic. I try. He doesn't press, just stares into the fire, and in that warmth, surrounded by breadcrumbs, borrowed boots, and a collection of someone else's grief, you feel something peculiar. Not peace exactly, but presence. And sometimes, that's more than enough. The letter arrives at dusk, carried by a boy too cold to make small talk and too polite to ask for payment. You open it beside the fire, still wearing half your cloak. The parchment is thick. The handwriting, florid. Someone trying very hard to sound important. It reads, You are summoned to attend the funeral of Madeline Ver Rees at sunrise tomorrow. The family requests a traditional rite, but asks that no words be spoken aloud. Payment enclosed. Do not be seen. At the bottom, a seal you recognize. One of the valley's oldest families. The kind that owns more cows than cousins and names their children after saints they've never read about. Dewey reads over your shoulder. No words? He frowns. Isn't saying the prayer kind of the point? You shrug. We've done, stranger. You leave in the dark. Hoods up. Lanterns unlit. It's a longer walk than usual. Up the hills. Past the old quarry. Into that quiet part of Wales where the fog arrives before your footsteps, and moss grows on every side of the trees, like even direction has given up. The house is enormous and silent, not empty, just quiet, in the way that only wealth can afford. A servant lets you in. No greetings, no questions. The woman lies in a room full of lace and stillness. Candles flicker without scent. The bread is already placed, neatly cut, dusted with sugar. A sin-turned confection. You kneel, press the bread, mouth the words, nothing aloud, nothing acknowledged. But you feel it. Whatever weight she carried, it's lifting now. Dewey watches the door while you finish. No one thanks you. But as you turn to leave, someone slips a small velvet pouch into your hand. It jingles softly and feels heavier than coin. Back outside, you finally look. Inside the pouch, a silver ring, cold as snow, and a folded piece of paper. You open it. 3 words. I believed you. Dewey says nothing, just stares out into the gray horizon where dawn is beginning to fray the edge of night. Back at the shed, you place the ring on the shelf, beside the wooden bird and the elderberry preserves. Dewey sits beside you, shivering from the walk. She was important, wasn't she? You nod, and still asked for us. Historians still argue whether the elite ever truly believed in sin, eating. Many accounts suggest they viewed it as folklore, charming perhaps, but unnecessary. But sometimes, when no one's looking, the truth peeks through. And what people fear in silence often says more than what they shout in daylight. You both warm your hands by the fire. Outside, the frost begins to melt. Dewey finally speaks. Do you think we're making a difference? You watch a droplet form at the edge of the roof, fall, and vanish into the snow. I think we're the only ones trying. He nods. That evening, no one calls for you. No bread waits on the doorstep. No whispers of death float down the chimney. Just fire and tea and the smell of a stew you probably shouldn't trust, but will eat anyway. Dewey hums something again, something hopeful, and you don't stop him. Because in the quiet between the sins, in the space where no one thanks you and no one sees you, sometimes a song is the only proof you've survived. You don't leave the shed the next day. No summons, no bread, just wind and the occasional creak from the roof you almost fixed. You spend the morning sharpening your old knife, not because you need it, but because it's something to do with your hands. Dewey patches a sock using a thread that once belonged to someone's curtain. He insists it adds historical flair. By noon, you're both staring at the wall like it owes you rent. Eventually, Dewey speaks. We should write it down. Write what down? All of it. The names, the rights, the stories. You shake your head. Too many, too strange, and no one would believe it anyway. Exactly, he says, which makes it perfect. You consider this. Writing would mean organizing, remembering, turning lives into sentences, sins into summaries. It feels heavy, but maybe that's the point. You pull out a worn scrap of parchment and begin. The first name you write is your father's. The second is your own. You stop after that, not out of reluctance, but respect. Because some stories need to settle before they're told. The afternoon passes in quiet work, the kind that doesn't fix anything, but makes you feel like you tried. Dewey reorganizes the shelf again. The goat tries to eat the tin of preserves. You stop him. Barely. Then, just as the sun slips behind the ridge, a knock. You freeze. It's not urgent, not loud. Just there. You open the door to find a girl. No older than 16. Hair in braids, hands clasped like she's holding a truth too fragile to drop. My gran, she says. She's not gone yet, but she's close. She asked for you. You nod. Of course. You walk with her, slow. She speaks little, just enough to say her gran believes in what you do, that she's not afraid, just tired. The house is warm, lit by oil lamps and quiet hymns. You kneel, speak soft words to the still alive woman who blinks slowly and squeezes your hand with all the force of a leaf in autumn. You leave the bread by her bed. She wants to do it herself, the girl explains. You nod again. Back at the shed, the fire has gone low. Dewey watches you enter. Says nothing. Just hands you a cup. You sip. It's terrible, but warm. Historians still argue whether sin eaters were ever welcomed before death, or if the rite was strictly post-mortem. But some records, scattered, whispered, suggest that those nearing the end sometimes wanted a say in how their burden was passed. Maybe that girl's gran just wanted to choose. That night, you lie in your cot and let your eyes linger on the wooden bird, the spoon, the note that simply says, for what you carry. The wind hums a low lullaby through the eaves. And for the first time in weeks, you don't dream of bread or ghosts or funerals. You just sleep, long, deep, untroubled. And that, for you, is rare enough to be sacred. The fire's gone quiet now. just soft embers and the slow hiss of cooling ash. Your body, tired in all the usual places, feet, back, that oddly specific ache behind your right shoulder, is finally still. The weight of the day, of the names, of the bread, begins to ease, like steam rising from damp wool. You let your breath slow, let the quiet wrap around you like a blanket worn too thin but too loved to replace. In the distance, the wind moves through the valley, not howling, not sharp, just present, a whisper across stone walls and crooked chimneys, the kind of wind that doesn't carry news or summons, just sleep. You imagine the shelf, its little oddments still balanced in their corners, the wooden bird waiting, the preserves unopened, the ring still cold, each piece a story, not yours exactly, but not yours either. You don't need to make sense of it tonight. You don't need to solve anything, fix anyone, or carry another crumb of sorrow. Not now, not here. Let your hands go slack. Let your eyes stay closed. If dreams come, may they be kind. If sleep takes you, may it hold you gently. And if someone, somewhere, whispers your name in thanks, even if you never hear it, may it land softly at your feet, like snow that doesn't melt, just stays long enough to be noticed. Good night. Rest easy. You've done more than enough.